Are seed oils secretly destroying our health? Social media seems to say yes, but what does the science say? My name is Dr. Sandhya Raman. I'm a lifestyle medicine doctor, and today we're going to have a deeper dive into seed oils and health. The main two concerns that come up about seed oils on social media are: one, are they pro-inflammatory? And two, when they are heated, do they produce toxins and carcinogens? Well, let's have a little look so that you can make an informed decision as to whether these should form part of your diet or not. But first of all, what are seed oils? Well, as their name suggests, these are oils that are made from seeds, and by far the most common two that you will come across are rapeseed oil, which is also known as canola oil in the States, as well as sunflower oil. So first of all, are seed oils pro-inflammatory? One of the main concerns around seed oils is that when we eat them, maybe they drive inflammation in our bodies, and over time this leads to us developing chronic diseases. And there are a few reasons why people on social media seem to think this is the case. The first is that around the time that seed oils became much more common in our diets is roughly around the time that we started to see quite a big rise in a lot of chronic health conditions such as diabetes and a rise in people having obesity. And on the one hand, whilst our diets have of course changed a lot, for example, we have a lot more ultra-processed food in our diet, much more sugar and fat added to our food, we've had a fall in levels of physical activity and a fall in sleep duration alongside a whole host of other lifestyle changes during that same period. So it's really hard, if not impossible, to really pin down this increase in chronic diseases to seed oil. Now, the second reason that people often suggest that seed oils drive inflammation is because they contain something called omega-6 fats. Now, omega-6 fats are a type of polyunsaturated fat that is found in fish and in plant foods. The idea of omega-6 fatty acids being pro-inflammatory is that they include something called linoleic acid. Now, linoleic acid is used to make something called arachidonic acid, and arachidonic acid is the starting point for the chemicals that are produced in the inflammation and the clotting cascade. Now, we do of course need inflammation in our bodies. It's much like calling the fire, the ambulance service and the police if there was a major accident. They cause maybe what looks like a lot of chaos, but they're really, really critical to sorting any problem out. So this is very similar to inflammation in our bodies. It serves a really, really critical function, but it starts becoming dysfunctional if, for example, it goes on for too long and it goes on when it's not appropriate. So in the right amounts and with the right cues, inflammation is really positive. If it's excessive and it goes on for too long, then it isn't. In that case, it can start to cause stress and damage to our cells and drive chronic diseases. Now, there are three things to note about linoleic acid. One is that it's an essential fatty acid, meaning we can't actually make it, and we do need to consume it in our diets. The second important thing is only a very small amount of it is converted into arachidonic acid, probably less than 1%. Beyond this, studies have shown that even if we eat more linoleic acid, this doesn't actually increase our production of arachidonic acid. And this meta-analysis of studies, where they combine a whole host of studies that ask the same or similar questions, and this allows us to get a larger amount of data so that we can start to get rid of the noise of things that are less relevant and start to see patterns that are emerging. They had a look at what happened when you give people omega-6 fats in their diet and then you measure the amount of inflammation in their blood. And what they found was that when people consumed omega-6 fats, they didn't see an increase in inflammatory markers in their blood. In fact, in many cases, they saw a decrease in inflammation in their blood. What's also interesting is what does seem to cause a rise in levels of arachidonic acid in our blood is eating arachidonic acid. Now, arachidonic acid is found in foods such as meat, poultry, eggs, and dairy. And what we find is that there's a linear increase in arachidonic acid in the blood as you consume more of these foods. But even here, it's not clear that this translates into an increase in inflammation and a worsening of health outcomes, although this study does say there isn't really enough data to show one way or another if that's the case. So essentially, the concept that omega-6 fats drive inflammation in our bodies and are associated with poor health outcomes is not backed up by science at all. In fact, the reverse seems to be the case. In people who consume more omega-6 fats, they seem to have a reduction in inflammation and they seem to have better health outcomes. And in fact, the American Heart Association presented a statement on this, looking at the consumption of omega-6 fats and cardiovascular disease. They concluded that in studies of all types, intake of omega-6 fats resulted in a reduction in cardiovascular disease and that higher intakes are beneficial for our heart health. They conclude by saying that if we were to reduce omega-6 fats in our diet, this would result in a worsening of cardiovascular risk. What about the concerns that when we heat these oils, they produce carcinogens and toxins? So another really common concern is that when we heat oils, they produce carcinogens and toxins. Now, whilst it is true that when we heat oils past a certain point, they produce things called trans fats. And these trans fats are well known to drive cardiovascular disease, to cause inflammation in our blood vessels, and to cause fatty plaques to be laid down there, as well as producing carcinogens such as polyaromatic hydrocarbons, acrylamides, and aldehydes. However, the production of these doesn't seem to happen at the kind of temperatures that we use in domestic kitchens, unless we have deep fat fryers, when we are heating oil for long periods of time, potentially cooling and then reheating them. That is when we start to produce these various carcinogens and trans fats from these seed oils. And it's also much more likely to happen when we get food from restaurants and takeaways, because of course they are much more likely to be heating these oils for longer periods of times at higher temperatures and to be using deep fat fryers. In fact, according to data from the European Food Safety Agency, the amount of trans fats in seed oils is roughly about 1%. It's much higher in other foods that we might eat. For example, it's about 3 to 6% in beef and in dairy, and even higher than this in foods such as lamb. So seed oils are certainly not where we need to be worrying about our source of trans fats, except where they are a part of ultra-processed foods. Now, a really good definition of ultra-processed foods that I like is that if you look at the ingredients, you'll find things in there that you wouldn't find in a typical domestic kitchen, such as, for example, emulsifiers, antioxidants, flavorings, and colorants. So in summary, there's no need to worry about seed oils driving inflammation and causing chronic diseases. They are clearly, from the studies, found to be anti-inflammatory and to reduce our risk of chronic diseases, and should be viewed as a healthy part of a diverse whole food diet. It is worth noting, however, that they are high in calorie density, which means that for its portion size, for a certain volume of food, they are high in calories. So if you're trying to lose weight, maybe be conscious of how much oil you add to your food or you use in cooking. And if you're actively trying to lose weight, it may be better to get these healthy fats from whole foods such as nuts and seeds. And therefore, dial down a little bit on added oils to reduce the calorie density of your food. For example, you could try using spray oil so you have more control, as well as things like using an air fryer. Thank you very much. I hope you found this video useful.